The local city council is quickly bypassed, and the federal government gets directly involved. Specifically, the Geological Survey of Canada takes on the case. They deploy highly sophisticated acoustic, seismic, and electromagnetic tracking equipment to locate the source of this massive disruption.
And what they find is staggering. The Geological Survey of Canada tracked the exact origin point of the Windsor hum with 95% accuracy. With 95% accuracy, the Canadian government pinpointed the source of the torment.
And it wasn't a natural geological formation?
No, they traced it to a tiny, highly industrialized landmass located directly across the Detroit River. The hum was emanating from a place called Zug Island, located in Detroit, Michigan, firmly on the United States side of the international border.
Right. And Zug Island is essentially this massive dystopian steel mill operation. It's a dense concentration of blast furnaces, smokestacks, and heavy machinery. But it is vital to understand that Zug Island is not just a private factory, it is an absolute fortress.
This is exactly where the story violently shifts from a bizarre scientific curiosity into a genuine, high-stakes geopolitical cover-up. Because when the Geological Survey of Canada realizes the source is Zug Island, the Canadian government follows standard diplomatic protocol. They officially request permission from the United States government to send their scientific investigators to the island.
They just want to figure out what piece of heavy machinery or what specific electromagnetic process is torturing thousands of citizens in Windsor.
Right. And the response from the United States government?
A blunt, immediate, and completely unexplained refusal.
Just no.
Yeah, they absolutely denied the Canadian government access to the island. They refused to cooperate with the investigation. And what makes this diplomatic stonewalling so incredibly suspicious is the extreme level of security surrounding Zug Island.
How secure are we talking?
The perimeter of the steel mill is heavily guarded by the United States Department of Homeland Security. There are imposing signs everywhere declaring it a highly restricted area defined by national security regulations.
Okay, think about the logical inconsistency here. If this is just a rusty ventilation fan or a malfunctioning blast furnace at a privately owned steel mill, why is the Department of Homeland Security acting like it is Area 51?
Exactly.
What possible reason does the United States government have to protect a corporate steel mill from Canadian noise compliance officers to the point of actively causing a diplomatic incident with a close ally? What exactly are they hiding on Zug Island?
That is the exact question that birthed the modern, complex conspiracy theories surrounding the phenomenon. If the United States government is fiercely protecting the source of the noise, then the noise isn't an accident, it isn't a rusty fan, it is a byproduct of something highly classified.
Okay, so that brings us to the first major conspiracy story we need to explore in depth, which ties the phenomenon directly to the United States military, the Cold War, and the deep sea. I find this theory deeply compelling because it mixes Cold War paranoia with real-world demonstrable physics.
It does. To understand the root of this theory, we have to rewind the clock to the early 1960s. The United States Navy had a massive existential tactical problem. They had spent billions developing this incredible fleet of nuclear-armed submarines, which were meant to be the ultimate undetectable stealth deterrent against the Soviet Union.
The whole point of a submarine is that it's hidden.
Exactly. But these submarines had a fatal Achilles heel. To receive updated communications, targeting orders, or launch codes from Naval Command, the submarines had to surface, or at least come very close to the surface, to raise an antenna.
And the moment a nuclear submarine surfaces, it instantly loses its primary strategic advantage: absolute stealth. It becomes immediately vulnerable to enemy radar, satellite imaging, and anti-submarine warfare.
So the Navy desperately needed a way to continuously broadcast complex orders to their submarines, while those submarines remained submerged deep underwater, completely hidden from the enemy. Their solution to this massive logistical hurdle was a highly classified initiative known as the TACAMO program.
TACAMO. That acronym stands for Take Charge and Move Out. Which, I mean, it sounds like an action movie catchphrase, but it was a very real, very intense military operation that operated around the clock.
It was huge. The Navy launched a fleet of specially modified aircraft that essentially acted as flying, highly mobile radio stations. These planes would fly in continuous, endless loops over the world's oceans.
And as they flew, they would drag miles-long wire antennas behind them, dangling down toward the water, and they transmitted highly encrypted messages using VLF very low-frequency radio waves.
And we really need to explain the physics of VLF to understand why this was a critical technological leap. High-frequency radio waves, like the ones used for FM radio, television broadcasts, or cell phones, simply bounce off the surface of the ocean. They cannot penetrate salt water, but very low-frequency waves operate on an entirely different scale. Their wavelengths are absolutely massive, often tens of kilometers long. Because of this immense wavelength, VLF radiation can penetrate deep into dense salt water, reaching the submerged submarines without requiring them to surface.
And this military history ties directly back to David Deming, the geosciences professor whose light bulb exploded in Oklahoma. Because David Deming explicitly believed and argued that these massive, continuous global VLF transmissions were the actual cause of the hum.
Yes, that was his grand theory.
But wait, we established earlier that electromagnetic waves don't make an acoustic sound in the air. If TACAMO's blasting radio waves, how are people actually hearing them?
For a very long time, the military and the scientific community assumed that they couldn't. It was conventional, undisputed scientific wisdom that VLF waves were entirely undetectable by human biology. The wavelengths were simply too large to interact with the human auditory system.
Right, our ears aren't built for that.
Exactly. However, a recent groundbreaking study conducted by the VLF group at Stanford University completely overturned decades of assumption. They proved, through rigorous testing, that under rare, specific physiological conditions, the human body can actually perceive VLF radio waves.
Oh, wow. So if you happen to fall into that 2% demographic, if you have a certain highly specific physiological or neurological makeup, your actual body can act as a biological antenna.
That's the theory.
It intercepts those massive, continent-spanning military radio waves and translates them into a low, droning, torturous hum inside your head. That is wild. It takes the invisible infrastructure of the Cold War and puts it directly inside your skull.
It's a terrifying concept.
And the historical timeline for this theory is what makes it so incredibly compelling, isn't it?
The timeline is perhaps its strongest piece of circumstantial evidence. Let's look back at the very first major documented outbreak of the phenomenon. The port city of Bristol, England, in 1971. That massive outbreak, which afflicted 800 people, occurred immediately after the United States and the United Kingdom navies began conducting heavy, coordinated VLF transmission testing in the North Atlantic Ocean.
So the military starts blasting the North Atlantic Ocean with unprecedented levels of massive VLF radio waves to talk to their submarines. And suddenly, a coastal port town in England starts hearing a maddening, low-frequency hum that drives them to the brink. That feels like an undeniable smoking gun.
It definitely looks like one.
But, okay, I have to step in here and challenge this narrative. I was looking at your notes and thinking about the logistics. Let me play devil's advocate for a second. If I'm the United States military, and I am spending billions upon billions of dollars to send top-secret, highly encrypted, covert messages to nuclear submarines hiding in the dark abyss of the ocean, why would I use a communication system that is so wildly sloppy that it rattles swimming pools in Connecticut, causes nosebleeds in Taos, and wakes up retired insurance salesmen in Canada? That has to be the absolute worst stealth technology ever invented.
It is an excellent logical counterpoint, and honestly, it exposes the primary flaw in the TACAMO theory. Covert military operations rely entirely on absolute, unbroken secrecy. If your highly classified, encrypted naval transmission is literally vibrating the floorboards of civilian homes across the country and making the evening news, it's no longer covert.
Yeah, it's a massive, embarrassing operational failure.
Exactly. Furthermore, the TACAMO theory fails to explain the localized nature of the hum. If it is VLF signals broadcasting from planes over the ocean, why does the noise completely vanish the second victims step outside their houses, as the Salzmans and others reported?
Right. If I walk out of my house, my cell phone still receives radio waves. The VLF theory has massive holes. So if we discard the idea that this is an accidental military broadcast, what if it isn't an accident at all?
Oh, meaning it's intentional.
Yeah. What if the government isn't leaking communication waves by mistake? What if they are emitting these highly disruptive frequencies, intentionally directly targeting civilian populations?
Well, that specific avenue of speculation opens the door to a much darker, much more disturbing narrative. It suggests a reality where the severe psychological and physical torment of the hum isn't a tragic byproduct of communication, but the actual intended goal of a classified operation.
Before we pivot into the darkest theories of intentional mind control and state-sponsored acoustic warfare, I want to take a brief moment to speak directly to you, our listener. Compiling these disparate sources, tracking down these deeply buried government documents, understanding the complex physics, and connecting the historical dots requires an enormous amount of analytical work. We are deeply dedicated to bringing you these unfiltered, comprehensive deep dives. Please remember to support the analytical work of this podcast. You can find all the details on how to support us, whether you choose to use PayPal or cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, Ethereum, or Solana, right in the description of this content. Your direct support is what makes this level of analysis possible.
It really is, thank you.
So now, let's step back into the shadows. We are moving from the accidental infrastructure of the Cold War to the realm of intentional psychological warfare. Let's examine conspiracy theory number 2, the telepathic ray gun.
This theory takes us entirely out of the realm of infrastructural accidents and drops us squarely into the realm of intentional state-sponsored psychological operations. The core thesis of this theory posits that the United States Department of Defense has successfully developed a highly advanced microwave mind control weapon, and they are actively testing its capabilities and biological effects on their own citizens.
When I first read that in the outline, I thought it sounded like pure science fiction. Like it sounds like a plot device from a comic book, a telepathic ray gun that shoots voices into your head. But you told me the historical sources actually back this up with undeniable declassified government paperwork.
They absolutely do. This is not baseless internet speculation. The foundation of this theory rests on a highly disturbing, officially declassified 1998 Pentagon document. The document is chillingly titled Biological Effects of Selected Non-Lethal Weapons.
Non-lethal weapon.
Through the Freedom of Information Act, journalists and the public eventually gained access to this report, which details extensive funded military tests using directed radio frequency energy. The explicitly stated goal in the document was to find a reliable way to implant voices, disruptive sounds, and white noise directly into the head of a human target, from a distance, without using any traditional acoustic speakers.
To put voices directly into someone's brain, entirely bypassing the ears, that is profoundly terrifying. And what blew my mind during my research is that this wasn't just some hypothetical futuristic idea the Pentagon was kicking around in the late 90s. It's based on rigorously established peer-reviewed science dating all the way back to the 1960s. Specifically, a physiological phenomenon known as the Frey effect.
Yes, the Frey effect, which is also commonly referred to within the scientific community as microwave hearing. This phenomenon was discovered and documented by a brilliant researcher named Alan Frey in 1962.
What exactly did he do?
Alan Frey conducted a series of groundbreaking experiments to prove that microwaves could interact directly with the human brain to create the vivid perception of sound. The underlying mechanism here is something called thermoelastic expansion. Thermoelastic expansion?
Yeah.
When a directed pulse of microwave energy hits the human head, the water present in the biological tissue rapidly absorbs that energy. This causes a microscopic, nearly instantaneous thermal expansion of the tissue in the cochlea. That rapid expansion creates a physical pressure wave, an actual acoustic wave that originates inside the head and travels to the inner ear.
And in his most famous demonstration, Alan Frey used a short-range microwave transmitter to beam the spoken numbers 1 through 10 directly into a test subject's brain, and the subject heard the numbers loud and clear.
It was revolutionary.
But the wildest part of the Alan Frey experiment is the physical setup in the laboratory. There were highly sensitive audio recorders placed right next to the subject's head, but when they played the tapes back, they were completely silent.
Completely silent.
The microwaves bypassed the air in the room entirely. And to prove beyond any shadow of a doubt that this wasn't an acoustic phenomenon, Alan Frey brought in a participant who was clinically deaf.
That was the undeniable revolutionary proof. The deaf participant, whose acoustic auditory system was completely biologically non-functional, was able to clearly and accurately hear the numbers 1 through 10 inside their head when targeted by Alan Frey's microwave device.
Oh my gosh.
It proved definitively that you could beam complex auditory information directly into the human mind, completely bypassing the ear canal.
So we established the timeline. Alan Frey proves the physics in 1962. The Pentagon takes Alan Frey's research, and by 1998 they are actively drafting documents about developing non-lethal weapons based on it. Now, why would the military want a weapon that makes a low, droning, humming noise in someone's head? Why not just use conventional weapons?
To answer that, we have to look at known, heavily documented United States psychological warfare tactics. We only need to look at the severe interrogation techniques utilized at military detention facilities like Guantanamo Bay.
Right.
The military has a long, highly documented history of using acoustic torture to break the will of prisoners. They would blast aggressive heavy metal music or high-pitched sirens at deafening volumes into solitary cells for days or weeks on end. The primary goal wasn't just to irritate the prisoners, it was to systematically and completely deprive them of sleep.
And sleep deprivation is a profoundly destructive, insidious form of torture. It doesn't leave physical scars, but it completely shatters a person's cognitive function, their emotional stability, and their grip on reality. Severe sleep deprivation induces extreme nausea, violent dizziness, paranoia, and crushing anxiety.
Which, if you recall the testimonies we discussed earlier, are the exact specific physical symptoms experienced by the victims of the global hum phenomenon in Taos, Bristol, and Windsor. The spontaneous nosebleeds, the extreme nausea, the crippling dizziness, the complete inability to sleep.
It is a terrifyingly perfect match. So the conspiracy theory suggests that the military took the crude acoustic torture of Guantanamo Bay, where you had to use giant speakers, and they upgraded it using the invisible physics of the Frey effect. They created an invisible, completely untraceable psychological weapon.
Yes, that's the theory.
But that raises a massive ethical and logical question. Why test it on Hueytown, Alabama, or Taos, New Mexico, or TACAMO, Indiana? Why target innocent American citizens?
Well, the speculation within the conspiracy community is that the military desperately needed controlled, isolated testing environments. If you want to test a highly classified invisible microwave weapon on a civilian population to see if it successfully causes incapacitation and sleep deprivation over a long period, you don't test it on New York City or Los Angeles.
Right, that creates way too much noise, far too many variables, and way too much media scrutiny.
Exactly. You test it on small, geographically isolated, quiet towns. You hit roughly 2% of the population with a focused microwave beam. You monitor the local hospital admissions for unexplained nausea and anxiety. And you watch how quickly the social fabric of the town starts to unravel.
Man, it is a horrific dystopian thought. Testing a weapon of mass psychological destruction on your own people, basically using them as lab rats. But looking at the overarching narrative, does this actually hold up to rigorous scrutiny? We know the Frey effect is real, and we know the Pentagon wanted the weapon. But is it the cause of the hum?
As compelling and genuinely terrifying as the declassified Pentagon documents are, the theory suffers from a massive logical flaw when applied to the global hum. If the Department of Defense has been secretly testing this microwave weapon on small towns since the 1990s, why are they still testing it decades later?
Yeah, that makes no sense.
A highly funded, classified military weapons testing program does not run continuously for 30 or 40 years without either deploying the weapon in an actual active conflict zone or scrapping the project entirely. Furthermore, if this is a highly classified United States weapons program, why did the very first massive outbreak occur in Bristol, England in 1971, nearly 3 decades before the Pentagon document was even drafted?
Yeah, the timeline completely destroys the theory. If the U.S. is building a secret ray gun, they aren't going to turn it on in an English port town in 1971 and then just keep the machine running aimlessly for 50 years without ever using it in a war. It's slightly too sci-fi.
Exactly.
It requires a level of sustained, multi-generational bureaucratic competence and endless funding that frankly doesn't exist in the real world.
I agree completely. While the Frey effect is real, we must dismiss the telepathic ray gun as the definitive explanation for the global hum. However, discarding the military theories pivots us to a threat that is not science fiction. It is a threat that is deeply rooted in reality, heavily researched, entirely plausible, and much, much closer to home.
And this brings us to conspiracy theory number 3, the pipeline syndrome. And I have to say, looking through the extensive sources and data you provided, this is by far the most heavily researched, meticulously documented, and physically sound theory of them all. It strips away the military paranoia and replaces it with brutal industrial reality. It all starts with a man named Steve Kohlhase.
Yes, Steve Kohlhase. He is a highly intelligent, methodical mechanical engineer living in Brookfield, Connecticut. He has an extensive professional background working in highly technical, complex industrial environments, including nuclear power plants.
So he knows his stuff.
He really does. He understands vibration, acoustics, and heavy machinery. In the fall of 2009, his quiet life was completely disrupted, but not in the way you might expect. It didn't start with a letter to the newspaper or an exploding light bulb. It started with his dog.
Right. Steve Kohlhase had a black lab, a completely normal, happy family pet. And one day, this dog just stops halfway up the stairs. The dog starts cowering, trembling uncontrollably.
It was very sudden.
Over the next few days, the dog becomes inexplicably terrified of the house, walking around constantly with its tail tucked between its legs, showing signs of severe, unprompted depression. Steve Kohlhase takes the dog to the vet, but the vet cannot find a single thing physically wrong. The vet is so baffled by the sudden behavioral shift that they end up prescribing human antidepressant medication to the dog.
It was a bizarre, deeply upsetting situation for the family. But very shortly after the dog's severe behavioral changes, Steve Kohlhase himself began to physically experience the phenomenon. He started hearing a low, oppressive, continuous rumble.
Just like Taos.
Yeah. He felt that terrible, familiar sensation of his brain being physically squeezed inside his skull. And because he is an experienced mechanical engineer, he doesn't jump to conclusions about ghosts or military weapons. He starts looking for physical, measurable evidence.
And he finds the evidence right in his own backyard. He walks out and looks at a swimming pool, and the surface of the water is actively vibrating. It is rippling continuously, as if there was a micro-earthquake happening beneath his property that never stops.
But here is the crucial, paradigm-shifting observation Steve Kohlhase makes, the observation that absolutely blows the TACAMO and microwave ray gun theories out of the water. He notices that when the sound is at its absolute worst, maddeningly loud and oppressive inside his house, the exact moment he steps outside into his yard, the sound almost completely vanishes.
This is the massive acoustic breakthrough. Steve Kohlhase realizes that the hum is not raining down from the sky, and it isn't an invisible beam targeting his brain. He realizes that the houses themselves are the actual problem. The structures are acting as massive acoustic resonance chambers.
Exactly. But what physical force is generating the massive vibration that the houses are amplifying? Steve Kohlhase recalled that a massive energy company called the Iroquois Gas Transmission System had recently built a huge compressor station and expanded high-pressure natural gas pipelines in his immediate geographical area.
So Steve Kohlhase basically turns into a full-blown, obsessive industrial detective. He starts spending all of his weekends driving around the state of Connecticut, physically mapping out the exact routes of these massive, high-pressure, underground natural gas pipelines.
And he knocks on doors along the route, asking strangers if they hear a hum or suffer from unexplained headaches.
And he finds a massive, direct correlation. The closer a house is to the pipeline, the worse the symptoms. But he doesn't stop with Connecticut. He takes his rigorous mapping research global.
He connected with a prominent Canadian researcher named Glenn McPherson. Glenn McPherson had spent years building a highly detailed, comprehensive global map of reported hum sightings, plotting every verified victim complaint on a digital grid.
Okay.
Steve Kohlhase took Glenn McPherson's global map of human suffering, and he overlaid it directly with the industrial maps of high-power natural gas pipeline infrastructure across the United States and Europe.
And the result of that data overlay is absolutely staggering. It was a near-perfect geographical match. The clusters of human torment perfectly mirrored the physical expansion of high-pressure gas lines. Let's look back at the historical anomalies we discussed earlier. Bristol, England, in 1971. That massive outbreak directly followed a massive citywide expansion of their underground gas line network.
Yeah, and Taos, New Mexico in the early 1990s. The town had just installed brand new, high-power natural gas lines to service the growing population right before the town went mad.
The geographical and historical correlation is undeniable. Now, we need to explain the actual physics of how a metal pipeline buried deep underground can physically torture someone inside their second-story bedroom.
Sure. When massive volumes of high-pressure natural gas are forced through these huge pipes by industrial compressor stations, it creates a very specific, very powerful, low-frequency vibration. It is a mechanical resonance that travels through the Earth itself. When that subterranean vibration hits the solid concrete foundation of a modern, well-insulated house, the entire house begins to act as a resonance chamber.
Think of it like this. It is exactly like living inside the hollow wooden body of an acoustic guitar. The underground pipeline is the musician, continuously plucking the lowest, thickest string. If you were standing outside in your yard, the sound wave has room to dissipate into the open air. You might barely feel it.
Right, it just disperses.
But if you are trapped inside the highly insulated wooden box of the guitar of your house, the physics change entirely. The vibration enters the foundation, travels up the walls, and bounces off the ceiling. It creates what acoustic engineers call standing waves, trapping and actively amplifying the low-frequency energy until it literally shakes your bones and squeezes your brain.
That acoustic guitar analogy perfectly illustrates the inescapable terror of pipeline syndrome, which is the official term Steve Kohlhase coined to describe the resulting physical and psychological illness. And here is the truly insidious part of modern construction. The better insulated your house is, the worse the amplification becomes.
Wow, because it's sealed so tight.
Modern homes are sealed tight for energy efficiency, which makes them perfect acoustic traps. Steve Kohlhase discovered a deeply tragic case that perfectly exemplifies this horrifying dynamic. He found a family living in West Hartford.
This specific story breaks my heart because it highlights the innocent collateral damage of this infrastructure. This family in West Hartford had a young son who was suddenly, inexplicably suffering from terrible chronic headaches. He became extremely lethargic, socially withdrawn, and was showing signs of severe clinical depression.
They took him everywhere.
Yeah, the parents took him to multiple specialists, but the doctors were completely baffled. They couldn't find a single medical, neurological, or psychological cause for the boy's severe suffering.
Steve Kohlhase heard about the case and investigated their property. He discovered two critical intersecting facts. First, their home was located very close to a recently expanded, highly active pipeline route. Second, and most tragically, the parents had recently undertaken a major home renovation. They had heavily re-insulated their entire house, specifically aiming for better energy efficiency to lower their heating bills.
They thought they were being responsible homeowners. They thought they were keeping the cold winter air out. But what they were actually doing was sealing the low-frequency vibrations in. By insulating the walls, they had inadvertently turned their own son's bedroom into a highly pressurized, perfectly sealed megaphone for the pipeline's low-frequency rumble.
Yeah, Steve Kohlhase brought in his sophisticated recording equipment, proved unequivocally that the very walls of the house were vibrating at a dangerous frequency, and finally gave the parents the physical answer they had been so desperate for.
But the implications of pipeline syndrome go far beyond severe headaches and lethargy, don't they?
They absolutely do. The chronic sleep deprivation, the endless physical torment, and the neurological disruption caused by pipeline syndrome can lead to catastrophic, irreversible mental breakdowns. Steve Kohlhase controversially noted a deeply chilling geographical correlation regarding the 2012 Sandy Hook tragedy.
And we want to be incredibly careful and impartial here. No one is saying a humming natural gas pipe directly causes a person to commit a mass atrocity. That is absurd.
Right, definitely. But through his extensive mapping of the area, he discovered that the perpetrator of that horrific event lived in a house situated directly on a highly active, high-pressure pipeline route that had recently seen a massive surge in local hum activity and complaints.
Okay, so Steve Kohlhase rigorously speculated and actually shared this detailed research with state law enforcement, by the way, that extreme prolonged sleep deprivation and inescapable acoustic torment could act as a severe psychological catalyst. If a human mind is already fragile, already fracturing, being physically trapped inside a vibrating acoustic chamber for months on end could absolutely accelerate a total mental collapse.
It really highlights the extreme, literal life or death stakes of unchecked, unregulated infrastructural noise pollution, which begs the ultimate frustrating question. If Steve Kohlhase has mapped this out so perfectly, if the geographical data correlates flawlessly with the outbreaks and the acoustic physics are sound, why hasn't this been officially verified by the federal government?
Why aren't they doing anything?
Why aren't the massive energy companies stepping in to fix the compressor stations and dampen the pipes?
The answer to that question is always, inevitably, money. It is the ultimate brutal economic reality. Think about the unimaginable financial ramifications of disclosure. If the federal government officially admits that the high-pressure gas pipelines powering the country are physically causing 2% of the population to suffer from severe neurological distress, organ resonance, and sleep deprivation, the legal liability would be absolutely astronomical.
It would be financially apocalyptic for the global energy sector. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of miles of deeply buried, vital infrastructure spanning the entire globe. To mandate that energy companies dig up, retrofit, acoustically dampen, or completely reroute that massive network to silence the low-frequency vibrations would cost hundreds of billions, perhaps trillions of dollars.
Wow, trillions.
From a purely cynical corporate standpoint, it is far cheaper and infinitely easier for corporations and governments to simply ignore the 2% of people complaining. It is easier to write them off as having tinnitus, label them as hypochondriacs, suggest they need psychiatric help, and quietly maintain the profitable status quo.
It is the brutal, uncaring reality of a highly industrialized world. Your personal suffering, your vibrating house, and your nosebleeds are considered acceptable collateral damage to ensure the grid keeps pumping cheap energy to the masses.
It's tragic. So, summarizing the extensive journey we have taken today through your research sources, we have moved from the tragic, isolated flight of Bob and Katanya Saltzman escaping their ruined sanctuary in Taos, New Mexico.
Right.
We navigated through the bizarre geopolitical stonewalling of Homeland Security over the industrial fortress of Zug Island. We examined the physics and the ultimate failures of the military mind control theories and the Frey effect. And we finally landed on the stark, terrifying, scientifically grounded reality of pipeline syndrome.
The global hum is not the result of alien visitors, and it is not a classified telepathic ray gun targeting citizens. It appears to be the immense mechanical side effect of our own vast subterranean industrialized world.
It is the literal sound of the machine we built. It is the engine of modern society, humming constantly beneath our feet, completely indifferent to the handful of people it is slowly driving mad.
And this leaves us with a final, truly chilling concept to mull over as we look to the future. As we move into an increasingly hyper-connected, fully electrified era, we are endlessly expanding our underground infrastructure. We are burying deeper, we are pushing higher pressures through larger pipes, and we are blanketing the entire globe in 5G networks and dense electromagnetic webs.
And if the relatively simple natural gas pipelines of the 1990s are already causing this level of physical trauma, how many other invisible, unmeasured, entirely unregulated frequencies are currently passing through our bodies right now?
Right. What happens to human biology when the whole world becomes one giant, heavily insulated acoustic chamber that we can never, ever escape?
That is a thought that will keep you up at night, even if you are lucky enough not to hear the hum.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on this incredibly deep dive. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, support the show through the links in the description, and share this podcast with anyone who needs to hear it. Stay curious, stay questioning, and we will see you next time.